said. If you guys are unfamiliar with CROW, we are the Clinic for the Rehabilitation of Wildlife. And what we do is we rescue, rehab, and release all sorts of wildlife in Southwest Florida. And we do this off of grants. Since we are a nonprofit organization, we do this off of grants and special events like this, as well as donations. So we would like to bring you tonight's program thanks to the Environmental Education Award by Lee County Electric Cooperative, or LCEC. And we just want to thank them for their continuous support, and as well as everybody that has tuned in near and far. So today we are going to talk about Bats in Lubee 101, the biology, conservation, and education.
Thank you for calling CROW. This is Brian. How may I help you?
Our presenter is Brian Pope, and he is actually the director over at Lubee Bat Conservancy. And he is originally from Pittsburgh. Brian got his Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Penn State, and he's a dedicated professional who specializes in nonprofit leadership, conservation, education, and zoological management. He's very passionate about his role in the zoological conservation field and is working to further Lubee's status as a global leader in bat conservation and education. So again, we thank you for attending, and as for questions goes, Brian wants to be very interactive today with his audience. So if you have questions at any time during the presentation, please feel free to ask. We just ask that you mute any of the background noises that you have, cats, dogs, doorbells, anything like that. So again, thank you for attending, and I'll turn it over to Brian.
Well, thank you, CROW, for having me and giving me an opportunity to talk about bats and Lubee. When I do these presentations, I kind of like to talk about some different things. So we're going to be talking about endangered species, extinct species. We're going to be talking about a bunch of things today. So I appreciate that all you guys are here and joining us for this talk. So I don't see a lot of unmuted, and I don't see a lot of people, but I'm just curious if anybody wants to chime in, if you've ever heard of Lubee Bat Conservancy before this presentation, if you want to put your hand up or unmute or say yes or whatever, because we've been around now for this July will be 32 years. So we've been doing, I got a thumbs up, cool. I'm still kind of new to these Zoom things, so I didn't even know that was an option, so very cool. My wife's laughing in the background. She also works at Lubee, and if I have technical issues, she's going to come out here and help. But that's pretty cool that you guys did that. So, but yeah, so we've had a global reach. We've been doing this for over 3 decades. We're still kind of small. We are a nonprofit, and not a lot of folks really know about us. So I always appreciate the opportunities to be able to talk about the work that we do and the bats that we have there, and some of the programs that we've been involved in, not just in Florida, but also around the world. So. What I'm going to do with PowerPoint, like Rachel was saying, is I like this to be interactive. I like for people to talk. I'm going to be asking you questions, and if you guys have any questions during this, and this isn't a save it to the end kind of a thing. If you have any questions, so please feel free to ask. I like a lot of interactive dialogue whenever I have an audience. So, but if you do have background noise, just go ahead and mute that. So I'm going to try sharing the screen, and hopefully this works. And then I'm going to go large screen, and then hopefully you guys can see all this. So give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, can you guys see that screen then? That's Lubee 101, yes?
Perfect.
Great, okay. So just to let you know a little bit about our organization, like I said, we are a nonprofit dedicated to saving bats and their habitats through research, conservation, education, with a focus on children and community engagement. And we added that last part really over the past few years because of everything we do. I don't think it's enough to say that we just save bats because a lot of our programs involve children, they involve communities. And quite frankly, as you guys know, is the way that CROW's involved with community. If you're not involved with the locals, you're not going to have any conservation. You're not going to have any programs that are going to work and be positive. So we added on to our mission statement because it's what we've been doing for 3 decades now. Our purposes, animal care, conservation, and education. Animal welfare is held to very high standards and making sure that our animals receive the best care possible, just like the folks at CROW do. And this is in line with modern zoological practices and philosophies. Our programs connect children with nature, foster a sense of environmental stewardship. And then the main thing is we want to inspire the next generation of kids out there, the next generation of conservation scientists and educators, because when we're gone and we're retired, whether that's in Southwest Florida in Sanibel or maybe in PA, wherever I'm from, or somewhere in between, which is where my wife would like to end up, we got to inspire those kids because we need people to come up and care about animals and care for the natural world and get inspired to be leaders. And I'm very proud of the work that Lubee's done because that's one of our core institutional purposes, and we do a lot of work with that. A little bit more about us. We house the largest and most diverse collection of bats in the world. We have about 200 bats representing 13 species, and 3 of those species are native Florida bats, which I'll talk about. The rest of those are Old World fruit bats. We are an association of zoos and aquariums certified related facility, and so a lot of the larger zoos, very well-run zoos and institutions in North America are AZA accredited or certified related facilities. Disney's Animal Kingdom, Columbus Zoo, San Diego. So we just went through that process. We went through our inspection January of 2020, and we got awarded. It's our 5th time in a row. It happens every 5 years. We just got awarded that again for the 5th time. And what the AZA is looking at is everything from animal care and welfare to veterinary practices, governance, financial stability, safety, security, conservation, research, education, you name it, they look at it. It's a very long and arduous process, but we're very proud to say that we just got our 5th certification. We are the only organization in the world that houses endangered bat species while maintaining active conservation education programs, and we've been doing this since 1989. So we had this infographic made in July of '89, so it's a little bit out of date, but I really like it. I think it's cool. So just some of the things that we've accomplished over the years. So we do a lot of education programs. So 170,000 people have been reached. That's been increased by about 20,000. On the bottom right corner, 15 endangered species have benefited from our education programs. 180 conservation projects. We're actually up to 192 conservation projects funded. Over to the left, you'll see some little, like a big mama bat and some baby bats. A little over 700 bats now born at Lubee. We have built and installed, it says 52, we're up to 86 bat houses around the state, and some of the other things that we're involved in, and I'll talk about a couple of these later, but we have built schools, created jobs, protected forests, empowered women's groups, done education, community engagement. We work with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, Veterans Group, Wounded Warriors. We do a lot, and it's a smaller operation. There's only 9 of us, but we get a lot of stuff done, which is pretty cool. So, as I mentioned, we were founded in '89, and really why bats? And our original founder really had a keen interest in bats. Unfortunately, he passed away after 2 years after we were founded, but he had a real strong connection with bats, and they're very neat. So they're the only mammals that can fly, and there was limited research knowledge at the time. Bats are extremely important to humans when it comes to agriculture, environment, ecosystem services, and what we like to say is that they are the most important mammals because of what they do on a daily basis for agriculture, ecosystem, and environmental services. So what are bats? Well, they are mammals, just like I'd said, and I'm going to show you a pretty cool slide here in a bit where bats fall in the whole grand scheme of all the orders of mammals, but they're in their own order. And Chiroptera is Latin for hand wing. And as you guys can see, hopefully you can see my mouse moving around. This is a really good shot of a fruit bat that we have at Lubee. It's called a little golden mantle flying fox. Its body is about that big. It's pretty small compared to some of the big ones we have. Got a wingspan, probably about 2.5 feet. But this is a really, really great shot of what a bat looks like, the anatomy and physiology from the outside. So got his head here. So if you look at this shot, it's his upper arm. And the upper arm is in proportion to the rest of the body, but this is his elbow right here. You can see how big that forearm is, going from the elbow all the way to the wrist. And so if you were to put that elbow right here, you can kind of see how, oops, I didn't want to do that. I kind of wanted to go back. Let me go back. You could see where his wrist would kind of slide. So their forearm is pretty much the entire length of the body. And they have 10 fingers and 10 toes. But if you look in the wing here, we'll count them out. It's the thumb is digit 1, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. So they have 10 fingers and 10 toes. And what makes them unique, what gives them ability to fly, is that they have the skin from the ankle to the pinky. It's called the patagium. And then you have skin in between all the fingers, and then a little sheet of skin there, and then a sheet of skin that goes from the wrist over to the shoulder. So that whole arm and that hand is encased in skin. Now, if you also look, they don't really have much in the way of backsides. Their butts aren't really that big, and they kind of got short little legs. But they don't have hollow bones because they're like a bird, because they're mammals. And so they really lost a lot of their weight on their backsides, and they have these kind of small legs. Not a lot of musculature there, but what enables them to hang upside down is they have locking tendons in their toes. So just like it takes effort for us to make a fist to curl our toes, it will take effort for them to open them up. And the reason that bats hang upside down is to take flight. Because all they have to do is look around, which is a myth we'll talk about in a minute. Look around, see where they want to go, let go of those toes, drop, catch air, and they take off. And that's why bats hang upside down. So, question for the audience. So if anybody wants to unmute, please do. So what are bats related to? I'd said that they were in their own order, but what exactly are they related to? So primates, or rodents, or carnivores? Anybody want to take a guess what they may be related to? Unmute if you'd like, because I only see a few people.
Carnivores?
Carnivores, one. Anybody else?
I'm going to vote primates.
Primates? Very good guess. Anybody else?
I'm going to second the primates, but I have no idea.
That's cool. Nobody said rodents, which is good. I think I might have mentioned that, but that's great. So what they are related to are carnivores. So out of these animals that are up there, so we got primates, rodents, and carnivores, bats are more closely related to carnivores. But I'm going to pull up this graphic here. So, and this has a tendency to change. This particular structure, these are the orders of the mammals, has stayed pretty much the same for quite a long time. So if we're going to look at what bats are more closely related to, they're over here. In actuality, they're more closely related because carnivores are right here. So you have felids, canids, pinnipeds, which are seals. But if you look where they branch off, they're actually more closely related to rhinos and tapirs and horses than they are to anything else. They kind of branch off here. So this animal, just by looking at that kind of shadow, does anybody want to take a guess of what animal that is that I'm looking at? Right there with my mouse?
Armadillo.
Somebody said armadillo. Anybody else?
Anteater?
It's actually the most
pangolin
trafficked mammal in the world. It's a pangolin, and there are 8 species, and they're just getting decimated for their scales, which is really just carrot and hair. But then it branches off, so your carnivores. But bats are actually right here, more closely related to rhinos, horses, and tapirs. But let's look. So over here, that's where humans are, and primates kind of branch off here. And then right here, rodents. So bats are way over here, and people say that they're flying mice and flying rodents, and the German word for mouse or for bat is Fledermaus, which is flying mouse, but that is absolutely false. They're in their own order, but they're more closely related to horses, rhinos, tapirs, and tigers. Okay, so talk about some myths. Do they have rabies? Well, they can get rabies, and really any species of mammal can get rabies, but they don't just have it. And actually 0.1% of bats have rabies. They can spread it, but so can cats, dogs, foxes, skunks, but bats just don't have it. And the thing with rabies is when a bat contracts it, talking about our native Florida species, their bodies are so small that virus just ravages them, and they're usually dead within 48 hours. So are bats blind? Absolutely not. They can see very, very well. There are quite a few species of bats. I'll get to that in a minute, but we can split them up into 2 groups. You have your megabats, which are old world fruit bats. Those are primarily the bats that we have at Lubee. And then you have your microbats, which are the bats pretty much found all over the world. And with the microbats, the majority of the species, they echolocate. The megabats, like we have at Lubee, the big flying foxes, don't echolocate. But whether they do or they don't, it's a myth that bats are blind. They can all see very well. Echolocation is just an easier means to navigate at night, to get around trees, to hunt for insects that are flying around, but it's a myth that they're blind. And are bats get caught in your hair? They do not. Humans have a tendency to attract a lot of insects, a lot of gnats, flying insects, mosquitoes. Bat may swoop down to want to get that insect, but they do not want to mess with a human. Anybody want to guess how many species of bats are out there? Somebody's got to chime in.
About 1,400.
Somebody knows their stuff. Excellent. 1,421. Whoever said that, that's great. So yeah, there are 1,421 known species of bats as of today, because they're still finding more. And whenever I first started working with bats back in 1996, there was only about 920 species known. So really in 2.5 decades, found about 500 species, which is pretty wild. So we have, this is the ghost-faced bat. This is a horseshoe bat. Here are a couple of bats at Lubee. This one right here is the largest species in the world, the land flying fox. And this is called an African straw-colored fruit bat. And this species right here, the straw-coloreds, comprise the largest migration of mammals known in the world. It's not wildebeest, it's not caribou. About 10 to 12 million of those bats, where's my mouse, migrate every October and November in southern Africa. This is a hammer-headed bat, really neat species, kind of a crazy nose. The males have those structures that they use to call the females. And then right here is a species most commonly found in the southeast, and that is a Mexican free-tailed bat. We see that, that species in a lot of our bat houses. So let's talk real quick about what some bats eat. So we know that there's over 1,400, about 1,200 of those are the microbats that I was talking about earlier. So you have some bats, this is called the bulldog bat, that will eat fish. They can echolocate, those echolocations will really go underneath the surface of the water to enable them to catch fish. There are some bat species over here that will eat birds. And then there is this species of bat that's called a fringe-lipped bat that specializes in eating frogs. Now, they only eat the male frogs. Does anybody want to take a guess why? My wife's raising her hand, but she's not allowed to play. So if she doesn't know the answer, then I haven't been doing my job. Does anybody want to chime in on why they only eat the male frogs?
Because the male frogs call for the females, and then so the bats can find them.
Excellent. Excellent. You know your stuff, which is great. Yeah, males are the only ones making a noise, and that's how they find them. So you have vampire bats. They're only found in Mexico, Central, and South America. There are only 3 species: common vampire bat, white-winged, and hairy-legged. And the latter 2 actually are threatened with extinction because of problems with the caves going in and not only killing vampire bat species. When they do so, they also kill a lot of other species that are there, but habitat destruction. But yeah, vampire bats are very, very small animals. Only 3 species of vampires out of over 1,400 species of bats. And they do feed exclusively on blood, but it's pretty neat that you have an animal that is this specialized. And what's interesting about vampire bats is if there was another bat in the colony that did not feed that night, an unrelated, completely different bat will feed that specific bat just so they get something to eat. Doesn't have to be related. Just another bat in the colony will feed another member just so they have some kind of sustenance. They're a very, very colonial species.
Brian,
go ahead.
Barbara Kavanaugh has a question about what species migrates to Texas, to the famous caves.
So those are the Mexican free-tailed bats that I had that picture of earlier. So in Bracken Cave in Texas, and then Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, in a lot of those caves, Fry's Cave, Nye Cave, a lot of those in Texas, those are the Mexican free-tailed bats. Now we have, what's interesting is throughout the Southeast, those kind of bats will live in caves, bat houses, a lot of structures, bridges. But here in Florida, we have a subspecies that does not roost in caves. And we work with a lot of the Florida fish and wildlife biologists. And this one individual, I know she surveyed every cave in Florida, and not one free-tailed bat was found in there. So it's pretty neat that we have that species here, but the subspecies in Florida doesn't. But we find them in a lot of our bat houses, in bridges and other areas, but for whatever reason, they don't roost in caves.
Brian, a few of our listeners are having a hard time hearing you when you move away from the screen and the microphone.
Okay.
So I just wanted to let you know that, so that maybe.
Okay. I'll move up. I'll try to keep it close.
Okay, thanks.
So, and I'll talk a little bit louder. So the side we have here are the fruit and nectar bats. These are pretty much some of the ones that we have here in Lubee. These species that you're seeing here are not found in Florida. They're all overall fruit bats that found in Asia, Africa, Australia, and Pacific Islands. And then the majority of the bats, out of about 1,400 species, the majority of those are insect-eating bats, which comprise about 70%. And in Florida, we have all insectivorous species, which, talk about here, Florida's home to 13 species. Again, all of them eat insects. And for the most part, you can split them up into 2 groups. Your cave and your structure roosting bats typically live in larger colonies, whereas your tree roosting species are solitary. And these are the tree roosting species that we have here in Florida. So they're usually larger, more colorful, a lot of fur on them. Northern yellow bat, hoary, Seminole, and eastern red bats. For the folks out there from Crow, do you guys get a lot of bats in, and do you rehab and release those bats?
Yes, we do get bats in, and we do rehab them. Now, I wouldn't say that they're the majority of our patients, but we do see them, yes.
Okay. I may be contacting you at some point to see if you ever need homes for the bats. We may take them, so expect an email. And then some of the more common species we find, and these are the cave structure roosting bats in large colonies. So here's a really, really good shot of a free-tailed bat. Again, this is the species that will migrate, although the subspecies we have here in Florida does not. And we usually find a lot of these in Lubee bat houses that we build and install. So this Mexican free-tailed bat counts for about 95% of the bats that we have there. And then we also have the evening bat and the southeastern myotis. And Florida is a very important state for southeastern bats, southeastern myotis, because this is where the majority of the maternity colonies are found, are caves right here in Florida. Has anybody ever heard of or been to the Gainesville bat houses, the ones on the University of Florida campus? There are, cool, very cool. I mean, it's a really, really neat sight to see. So there are 3 large bat houses there. And I'm just going to go ahead and click. Anybody know how many? In the summertime, just like at Bracken Cave and Austin Avenue or Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, in the summertime, whenever it's peak colonies, and in between those 3 houses, there are 500,000 bats. And it's the largest inhabited bat houses in the world. It's really neat to see. But what's also interesting, whenever the bats are coming out in the evenings, are the predators that are around. And there are a couple of owl species. There are barn owls, barred owls, and some red-shouldered hawks, red-tailed hawks, but also Mississippi kites, which are flying around. Usually the bigger birds aren't agile enough to pick a bat off the wing, but what they'll do is they'll come down and hit that bat, stun it, and get it. Whereas the Mississippi kites that we see, which crow, you may see some of those birds every once in a while, the Mississippi kites are agile enough to be able to kind of have this aerial duel with the bats, which is pretty neat to see. And they're successful a small percentage of the time, but more so than the larger species of raptors. So here in Florida, we do have 2 endangered species. We have the gray bat, which is found really in the northern panhandle area, and then the Florida bonneted bat. The crow folks that are there, have you guys ever got in Florida bonneted bats or know any folks in the area that works with them? Because they're just found in they found them in Polk County, but it's really South Florida, over Charlotte Harbor area, I want to say, and then over on the East Coast as well. Crow, do you guys ever see this species?
Rachel, do you know? I don't know off the top of my head.
We've seen the Florida bonneted bat, but only a couple times in the last couple years. Really rare to see, and I'm pretty sure it has come in once or twice dead on arrival.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting, because I mean, they really don't know how many are out there. There could be a couple of hundred, there could be more, there could be less. And what's interesting is they are one of the most endangered mammal species in the world. So when we think of endangered, you might think of, species in Asia and Africa. Actually, one of the most endangered mammals in the world is found right here in our own backyard in Florida. So there's a lot of really good research going on right now. Lubee's funded some of it, but Zoo Miami has done some incredible work of finding what bat houses will work for this species. They found them in some residential structures. They've been getting a lot of the word out when it comes to construction companies and what to look for whenever they're building or if they find these bats in their roofs. So there's still a lot of ongoing research. It's needed, but kind of interesting that we have one of the most endangered mammals right here in Florida. So let's talk about why we need bats. What is their importance? So if we're just going to talk about bats in the state, they play a very crucial role in eating mosquitoes. They do eat mosquitoes. Southeastern myotis love them. They specialize in them. And we all know that mosquitoes can carry a lot of diseases, Zika, West Nile, but also the bats that we have here cause significant destruction. Not the bats, the insects we have here cause significant destruction to the crops in Florida. We're actually putting together a research paper on that, but it's amazing how much damage insects can do and how much the bats actually eat agricultural pests. So in 2011, the U.S. Geological Survey did a study that showed that that bats save farmers between $3.7 and $53 billion annually by eating those agricultural pests. And bats are the primary nocturnal predator of pests. And they've done a lot of past studies that are showing, one of the main ones that they're eating spotted cucumber beetles and corn earworm moths. So they're not eating the larvae, but they are eating are the adults. And they do a pretty good job at that based on the studies that they've done. Not only was it a nationwide study, but they showed over in Texas that they're controlling $20 to $30 million a year in certain counties just by eating these pests. Whenever it comes to the old world fruit bats, the tropical species that some of the ones that we have at Lubee, fruit bats are one of the key drivers of maintaining forest diversity. And they've done studies in Central and South America and Southeast Asia. When you have completely different species, but it's mirrored the findings that whenever you have clear-cut areas, a lot of those seeds, a lot of the plants and trees that are coming up are bat-dispersed seeds. And in some of those areas, they're responsible for 90% of the regrowth in the rainforest, which is just absolutely incredible. And bats don't really get a lot of credit when it comes to certain things, and rainforest regeneration is one of them, but study after study after study shows that a lot of these plants and trees that are coming up are bat-dispersed seeds. And years ago, I think it was Krakatoa, it was an island that it was a major volcano eruption in Southeast Asia and Indonesia, and it got a lot of plant life came back within a few years, and it was the bats that were flying over, going these large distances, dropping these seeds that were repopulating the island. And again, pollination, seed dispersal, they contribute billions to the economy. And then some of the fruits, plants that we depend on, mangoes, figs, dates, avocados, bananas. And if anybody likes a margarita, you can thank some of the nectar-feeding bats in the U.S. Southwest and in Mexico, Central and South America, because they are the primary pollinator of the agave plant, which is where we get tequila.
Brian, can I ask a quick question on behalf of Dawn? She wants to know, do fruit bats eat any meat at all? And if not, isn't that contrary to all bats being carnivores?
Not all bat species are carnivores. So there are 1,400 species of bats, and 70% of those eat insects. About 20% eat fruit, and then the rest of them eat anything from, again, there are vampire bats, only 3 species out of 1,400. You have certain bats that are carnivorous, but they really, it amounts to a very small species. Off the top of my head, when it comes to bats that strictly eat like a carnivorous diet, it's probably only about 5 to 10 species. Again, as opposed to 1,400. The majority of those, 70% are insect eaters, 20% are fruit-eating bats. Now, we did do studies with some of the bats at Lubee years and years ago, and we found that fruit bats will eat some insects, and we think it's because fruit bats are very much attracted to ripe fruit. And there's been a lot of studies done that show that, you know, bats are persecuted because they think that they're decimating these fruit crops. In reality, bats are really only go after overripe fruit, and overripe fruit attracts a lot of insects. So we found that they would take like crickets, mealworms, waxworms, that sort of thing. But for the most part, they have a strictly fruit diet.
So follow up to that, is the bat population being damaged by pesticides? Barbara wants to know.
That is a good question, and we don't know. I can tell you this, that years ago, whenever I was at Lubee from 96 to 98, and then I was at Disney for about 10 years, and then I came back in 2007, and we saw that around 2007 through 9, we had some rafters in a pole barn, and a couple years in a row, we had lost, I'd say probably anywhere from about 20 to 50 individuals. They're native species. They were southeastern Myotis, tricolor bats, and then free-tailed bats. And we found that we were getting large die-offs in the spring. And whenever we had submitted that for any kind of, you know, was it disease? Was it something that we're missing? They couldn't find anything, but they did find a buildup of toxins in their fat deposits. So we can't say specifically that's what killed those bats, but it is something that is being looked at as causing an issue. But I can't give you anything specific.
Thanks.
Okay, sure. So we'll talk about global status of bats. And then I'm going to have some interactive questions for you guys. So if you want to chime in, that would be great. So about 25% of global bat species are threatened with extinction. 40% of species in the United States are considered threatened. And in the past 50 years, we've lost 9 species, including the Guam flying fox, which was eaten to extinction, and the Christmas Island pipistrelle, which was lost really due to inaction. And real quick story about the Christmas Island pipistrelle. So Christmas Island is found northeast of Australia, and they had known back in the 90s and early 2000s that their populations were declining. They didn't really know why, but they think that it was an invasion of an introduced species of insect called these crazy yellow ants that were, whenever the moms would leave their pups to go off and feed, because this is an insectivorous species, they think the ants would get to the babies and irritate them, knock them down. They think that they were consuming them. But anyway, Australia's in charge of that island, and they went back a couple years later. They went back in 2003, 2005, 2007. When they went back in 2007, they found a small group of about 25 individuals, but still didn't do anything. And then they went back in 2009, and they only found 1 individual as a male. And I had mentioned earlier that we're part of the AZA. Well, I'm chairman of the AZA Bat Taxon Advisory Group. And there was a big meeting overseas where a lot of these tag chairs and a lot of these AZA zoo folks got together. And there was a woman named Dr. Jenny Gray. She's in charge of a lot of the big zoos out in Australia. And she played something for us. It was very powerful. I never forgot it. And she said, do you know what the sound of extinction is? Do you know what it sounds like to lose an animal? And everybody was like, you know, we weren't really sure what she's talking about. And she played us a recording, and it was the last echolocation call, the last audio of a Christmas Island pipistrelle, and it was a lone male searching for a mate on this whole island. They never ever heard from him again. So it was very powerful, and she really gave us that presentation to really draw it out of us. So why are we here? Why are we doing this? It's not just enough that we love animals. We got to do something about it. And that really kind of spurred me along to keep going further, not only as Lubee's director, but in the conservation, education, zoological field. Because it's a pretty powerful presentation. But that animal, I believe, was officially declared extinct just a couple years after that. So let's talk about endangered and extinct species. So participation, please, would be great. So I told you this isn't just going to be about bats. I like to get people involved just to see what's going on out there. So if we're talking about what has driven the Endangered Species Act, when did really wildlife conservation start? And I've only got a few slides on this, so bear with me. So the near extinction of the bison, the disappearance of the passenger pigeon helped to drive the call for wildlife conservation in the 1900s. So this right here is a pile of bison skulls taken. Does anybody know how many bison there were back in like 1900s? Does anybody know how many there were?
Millions.
Millions, good. So 1830 to 1900, there were 40 million American bison, they think. They dropped them down to 300. Does anybody know how many there are today? There are about 500,000. And a lot of those bison are on ranches. So ranchers are doing a lot when it comes to conservation of species, including bison. So the animal on the right is the passenger pigeon. Does anybody want to take a guess how many passenger pigeons there were at the turn of the century? Well, a couple centuries ago.
Millions.
40 billion. And they killed every one of them. And there were accounts that these passenger pigeons accounted for 25% of every bird that you see out there. And this is in all of North America. There's an awful lot of passenger pigeons, and they're all gone. So let's talk about some endangered species that were saved by the Endangered Species Act and AZA, because AZA has been involved with a lot of them. So I'll just go through these. We all know what this is, bald eagle. Who knows what the next one is?
Black-footed ferret.
Excellent. How about this one? They're here in Florida.
Whooping crane.
Cool. This one?
Turkey vulture?
California condor. Plenty of turkey vultures. No, it's California condor. California condor. This is a gray whale. By the way, if anybody ever has an opportunity to go whale watching, I highly recommend it. We've been very fortunate to be able to go on a few whale watching trips, and it is just an absolutely amazing experience. And then here we have our California sea otters. So these are all species, again, saved by the Endangered Species Act and AZA. Some more endangered species around the world. So we have forest elephants. There's actually 3 species of elephants: Asian, African, and then your African forest elephants. The problem for the African elephants is that their tusks have a pinkish hue, and poachers love them. And in certain areas of, I believe, Chad and other areas, they have killed over 75 to 80% of them in certain regions. Sumatran orangs, Philippine crocodiles, because reptiles count. And an eye. So an eye is a type of lemur, although it's kind of an odd one in Madagascar. So habitat destruction is really decimating a lot of lemur populations in Madagascar. But another reason that eye populations are declining is because of their middle finger. They have a very large middle finger that they tap on roots, they tap on plant material to find insects. And because they have these long fingers and they look weird, they come out at night, and they have these strange eyes and strange ears, they're looked at as demons by certain culture and killed. So we have the pangolins. Again, if folks aren't familiar with pangolins, please look them up online. The most trafficked mammal in the world. They're getting hit pretty hard. And then vaquitas. For those folks that may not have heard of a vaquita, it's a very small cetacean, really just found in around Baja California, Gulf of California, and they're really just getting hit pretty hard by gill nets. So let's talk about extinct species. I'm going to wrap this portion of it up, but I like to talk to folks. So we all know what that is. That's the dodo. What is this?
Tasmanian tiger.
Excellent. We all know what this is. How about this one right here? They're found here in the Carolinas, in the States. Carolina parakeet. How about this one? Stellar sea cow. How about this one? They think this one might still be around, but I don't know. Who knows what this is? Looks like Arpilliated, but it's not.
Ivory-billed woodpecker.
Excellent. Ivory-billed. So if you look at all these animals, okay, all these extinct species, and we're pretty darn sure they're extinct, they all have something in common with this animal right here. And it's not that they're extinct. So if we look, think about the animals that I just showed you, and then this mammoth right here, does anybody know what they have in common? Besides their
Humans caused their extinction.
That is correct, but I'm looking for something else. There is currently research being done by many, many institutions, organizations, and universities to bring these species back from extinction, de-extinction. So the question is, should we spend the money to conserve the animals that are here now, that are facing extinction, or should we bring these species back that we caused their extinction? Anybody want to, this isn't a right or wrong answer, this is just an opinion.
So they're wanting to Jurassic Park this.
They're already in the process of. Every one of those species I had on the slide, and then this one, they're very much in the process of. So the question is, and again, this isn't a right or wrong, I just like hearing people's opinions. Should we spend the money to conserve the species that are here now, or should we try to bring these species back whose extinction we caused?
We should do both.
So what I say is, as somebody who is a conservation biologist, we should absolutely try to save the species we have now and redirect our money there. That being said, I would spend darn good money to see a woolly mammoth, a dodo, or a thylacine. So not really a right or wrong. They're doing that research anyway, I can tell you that. But it's always interesting just to kind of see where people stand on that topic. We should be saving the species we have, but wow, I'd pay some money to go see him. My wife and I are taking my boys to New England this summer to see a great white. I mean, come on, it's, we like to spend money to see these animals you don't really get a chance to see. So not really right or wrong, just wanting you guys to kind of think a little bit. So anyway, conservation threats to bats, the deforestation affecting a lot of species. Fruit bats are hunted, as I mentioned before about the Guam-flying fox eaten to extinction. So you see this is a picture from a market, just unsustainable hunting. And you can't tell these people not to hunt these animals. Have been part of their culture. The problem is whenever it's not done sustainably, or the poachers are doing it to not just have a livelihood for their families and really for their communities, but they're selling it to make big profits and just without any regard to the species, where a lot of community members want these animals around. So really no limits on it. Their meat is supposedly a cure for asthma. And persecuted as pets, which I talked about before, and really a lot of this is just misunderstanding. A lot of these countries, they do not receive the protections that a lot of the big charismatic species do, like rhinos and tigers, although that some countries are coming around. Malaysia, where they had been, a lot of these big fruit bat species, these are the big Malayan flying foxes, we have about 60 some of them at Lubee, they had just started to receive some protection. They were wiped out of peninsular Malaysia, and they're just starting to receive some protection, which has been great. Has anybody ever heard of white nose syndrome? So
yes.
White nose syndrome, yeah, I mean, it's gotten a lot of media attention over the years.
And I'm from Minnesota, where we have this as a big problem.
Yes, yep. My wife and I are originally from Pennsylvania. A lot of those upper Midwest, mid-Atlantic states got hit in New England. So for those folks not familiar, it's a disease here in North America that kills hibernating bats. And I have Eastern North America. I obviously did an update. I got a map I'll show you in a bit. Excuse me. It's named for the white fungus that's found on their muzzles and their wings of these bats that affected. It was first found outside a cave in New York in 2006. Now, it came from Europe, and they have this over in Europe, but the bats there have adapted to it. The bats over in Europe are usually bigger, more muscle on them, more fat, and they're adapted to it, and they really don't have much of, it doesn't affect them too much. It's almost like smallpox with Native Americans. Whenever it was introduced, they really didn't have an immunity to it, and to use that analogy, it's kind of how these bats are with white nose syndrome. But really, on the surface, what it does is, and it really only truly affects bats that go into a hibernation. Our bats here in Florida don't hibernate, although they will in the Florida caverns region. There's a couple of species. It wakes them up during hibernation, so they get hungry, they get thirsty, and using that energy, it depletes their fat reserves. But what it also does is it's more than that. It affects their respiratory systems, it affects their immune systems as well. And it's just a devastating disease. So here we go. So this is the last map I found, whitenosesyndrome.org, it's WNS.org. You can find a lot of information, but ground zero is here, and you can see where it spreads. It's not here in Florida. They don't know if it's going to come here to Florida. There are plans in place that if it does, but this fungus really seems to be kind of in a 56 to 52 degree range, and it likes a certain humidity. But ma'am, you were just talking about Minnesota. You can see where it's all over Minnesota, Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania just really got hit. But again, it's in 39 states and 7 Canadian provinces in really a relatively short period of time. These are the species of bats that it affects. But but it affects different species at a different rate. So big brown bats, which are found all over North America, it's usually about a 25 to 40% mortality rate, whereas little brown bats, which is one of the most common, or was in North America, it's usually about a 90 to 98% mortality rate. So it affects different species at a different rate. Again, not found in Florida, although tricolored bats could be affected in the Florida Caverns Panhandle. So this is a map I wanted to put. Oh, so it is whitenose-syndrome.org if people want more info. So this one was taken, this is in 2010. There's ground zero. So you can see it wasn't quite as far yet. It wasn't in Minnesota. And then that was that map that I just showed you. So, I mean, it's really spread. And what's caused the spread are mostly it's been humans. It came from Europe because of humans, but they think also bats just might have it go into another cave, and it's really kind of difficult to stop it, but there are a lot of folks doing great work out there. And they think right now it's killed about 7 to 8 million bats, and I have that in eastern U.S. That should be all over the U.S. And again, this is bats found outside of a cave, how it affects their wing membranes, and you can see it on their muzzles. So what do? Well, we like to put a lot of pictures of cute bats on screens. These are actually twins. Look at my wife looking like one. These are twins that were born at Lubee a few years ago. Frick and Frack, they're absolutely adorable. So care, welfare, and breeding. We are the global leader in fruit bat husbandry, welfare, and medical management. Mentioned earlier, we house 200 bats, a few reptiles, and in 30 plus years, we've had, it's actually a little over 700 bats now. We also host a lot of management, like care and husbandry courses at Lubee for people how to take care of these animals. And also, if they go into the wild, what would a healthy bat look like? How would they handle a bat, or maybe draw blood if they want to learn more about them? So they can learn that kind of stuff at Lubee. So research, whenever Lubee was founded, little information existed really when it came to megabats. And we have had over 160 publications looking at everything from physiology to behavior, nutrition. We work with CDC, NIH, EcoHealth Alliance, and a lot of other people who are studying fruit bat immune systems. And again, about 160 published articles, chapters. And the thing with bats are they have extraordinary immune systems. So diseases that would affect humans don't seem to affect bats. So now that we're on that topic, I don't have a slide, but I did want to address this. So they do not know where SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19 came from. Back in 2013, over in China, they were studying bats in a cave. I don't believe it was in Wuhan. And they took samples from one bat species called an intermediate horseshoe bat. And they found a virus called RATG13. It shares 96.3% DNA, RNA, I should say, 96.3% genetic material with SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. Now, even though that's a much smaller genetic sample than human DNA, we share over 98% DNA with chimps. So if we're looking at that virus they found in a bat, it's pretty much apples and oranges to the virus that causes SARS-CoV-2. Now, they have done research with bat species to find if they could get infected with SARS-CoV-2. There is a species that's pretty common in zoos, pretty common in the wild, called an Egyptian fruit bat. It's found in sub-Saharan Africa over to the Mideast. They inoculated 9 individuals, and you can look this up, Egyptian fruit bat, SARS-CoV-2. You'll find the research, so I'm just kind of going with what I remember. And out of those 9 individuals, only one was able to get infected, and I don't believe that they even transmitted that to another bat. They did that study with ferrets, and 9 out of 9 became infected. They just did studies up at the National Wildlife Health Center in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, and they inoculated big brown bats. So big brown bats are found in Florida. They're found all over North America, Mexico, into the Caribbean and Central America, and South America as well. And they were resistant. So if you just Google big brown bats and COVID-19, at least that initial study showed that this is one of the most common North American bat species, could not get SARS-CoV-2, could not transmit it. They just weren't able to get it. I guess their receptor cells in their lungs just weren't capable of even binding with that. So there has been a lot of misinformation about bats, and they still don't know where this came from. Maybe it came from a bat and went to a pangolin. Maybe it came from a civet and went to a bat to a pangolin to a human. We don't know, but they have been unfairly blamed for this. The problem when it comes to these diseases is never bats. It's always humans. It's not primates with Ebola and AIDS. It's always humans going into these areas, taking out the forest, bringing these animals into these wildlife markets, and keeping them around all these other animals. So I didn't have a slide, but I did want to at least share some of that information. And I encourage you folks to just Google some of the things that I said so you can see the research that is out there. Some of the other things that Lubee is involved in. So this stuff's really cool. We do a lot of work in Florida with Florida species. I'll talk about bat houses here in a bit. Now, I saw you guys, Crow had posted this onto your Facebook page, and I saw a couple of questions about bat house, so I'll get to it in a minute. But this is really, really cool. So some of the things that we do is we'll set up these this equipment. So really there's a sensitive microphone in here, and it's connected to this box, and I can program this box to pick up certain frequencies. So I don't want it to pick up anything human, really insect, or any cars, things like that. But bats and their echolocations are higher than we can hear. So what we do is we'll set this microphone up for a few nights. It'll pick up the data. I'll take that box and just everything is downloaded on a flash drive. I send it in, and then we can get these to, we work with an environmental firm here, Norman Down Associates, and they can give me this data. And I've got to go through it to be able to identify the species. So what we look for is these little shapes. These are calls. So again, this is like a 1.7 second block. And we look for these search calls, and we look at the frequency, and we look at the shape. And I can look at this, and I say, okay, I look at this, and I could say that's a Mexican free-tail bat. These lines tells me that that bat probably got something to eat. So this one's really cool. Again, Mexican free-tail bats, very, very common in the area. Their echolocation calls are between 17 to 27 kilohertz. So again, I'm looking at this search call, and this is a great one, like boom. So I know that bat's searching, got a little downward tail, and I can look here and say, okay, it's between 17 and 27 kilohertz. Right here, this is a feeding buzz. So insect, boom, caught that insect. What's really neat, before I show you guys this, check it out. These guys are calling in 2 different octaves at the same time, which is incredible. So not only are they calling, they're calling really fast. They can do it in 2 different octaves. Right here, while they're searching and feeding, they're also talking to each other. We have no idea what they're saying. And this is the only species where we see these calls. But while they're flying, and people always, you know, why are you interested in bats? Why are they so unique? So you have a mammal that flies, that are very, very, very intelligent animals, that while it's flying in the dark, and they can all see, it's not that they're blind, but they're echolocating, they're hunting, they're navigating, they're feeding, and they're talking to each other all at the same time. And it's a thought process that humans just can't wrap our heads around what goes inside of a bat. But they do this all night, second after second after second. Absolutely incredible. So just one more slide. So we also have these really cute little bats here in Florida called tricolored bats, and I know that their calls, a good search call, is going to look like an L between 40 and 50 kilohertz, and that's the way that we're able to identify these species. And whenever we do it, a lot of times, you know, why do you do this? Well, we want to learn more about the species in your area, but if we're going to be putting up perfect bat houses, some of the species that I had showed earlier, the Florida bat species, so the really colorful ones, we'll never ever look at a bat house. They roost in trees pretty much primarily. So if we're putting bat houses up in a very rural area and they don't have those free tails or evenings or southeastern myotis, and all I find are these tree bats, and you know, maybe they don't really want to pay for a bat house to be put up if the species we're not looking for aren't there. But our houses have, we've had a lot of success with them. We did a lot of practice with them. We put up a lot of different ones. But we have about an 86% success rate. Occupancy takes about 5 months. Here's a really good shot of some free-tail bats in one of our houses. Here's a couple other designs we did. This is it was a cool link to like 3,000 bats pouring out of a house, but the links seem to be having trouble. But we put this up at a brewery in Gainesville. This is another design we did, and this is a 2x2 house, like 2 foot by 2 foot. So what do you guys need to do for a successful bat house? I saw these questions on Facebook, so I wanted to address them. At least 12 feet high. You can go higher, even better, because those bats like to have a nice big area, so whenever they come down, everything's clear. They're not just dropping and hitting the ground. Again, we put ours about 20 feet in the air. About 20 feet from a tree line, trees, branches, that sort of thing. So I left this picture up because you can see how out in the open it is, because they like their own piece of real estate. Don't put bat houses on trees, because too many branches, too much shade, too many obstructions, and predators. We have a lot of rat snakes in Florida, and they will climb the trees to get the bats, and so will possums and raccoons as well. So out in the open on their own posts. In Florida, we stain ours a medium brown color, so we actually use metal here, but on our bigger houses, we use metal. But some of the smaller ones, we use cedar, and then we stain it a medium brown color. We don't stain the inside chambers that we have there. Have it facing southeast, because throughout the year, that's whenever it's going to catch the most sun. They like to be hot. People ask, is it going to be too hot for them? No, they want it to be hot. We put ventilation around in our bat houses. They will like it hot. They'll find, if it gets too hot, they'll come down. If it gets too cold, they'll go up in the bat house. Within about a mile of water, so they have something to drink, and it's going to attract insects. Larger houses do better. We used to do single chambered houses, and they didn't really seem to work well. So chambers with bat houses with at least 3 chambers in them do really well. They like to be in large colonies. They like for there to be quite a few individuals. And as I just mentioned, if it gets too hot, they can go down. If it gets too cold, they can go out. So these are some of the things that we found out doing our research, and then we put up a lot of different types of bat houses that seem to work really, really well.
Are there bats documented on Sanibel?
I can tell you that there are, I'm sure there are. I'd have to go back and look. I'm sure they probably look for bonnet bats. Now, you guys are not very far from Pine Island, correct?
No.
Okay,
According to the Sanibel Captiva Wildlife Control, there are bats on the islands of Sanibel.
We put up a 4x4, so 4 foot by 4 foot house up in Pine Island on, there's like a UF field station up there, kind of at the north end of Pine Island, and by Bokeelia, I'm saying that right. And I set up some of my acoustic equipment there. So it was for a private individual, but he wanted to know what bats he had. And I got quite a few bats on Pine Island. Now I know different islands, but these bats are going to fly a pretty decent amount. So yeah, I would say you definitely have bats there, because I know there's still a lot of forested areas on there. But whenever I did those studies up in Pine Island, I found quite a few species. If I recall correctly, it was mostly yellow bats, because northern yellow bats like palm fronds. Eastern red bats because they like oak. And then the free-tailed bats just because they seem to like a variety of areas. So the red and the yellow bats would never look at a bat house. But whenever I found, when I do these studies specifically to put up a bat house, as soon as I see free-tailed bats, I'm like, cool, we're good, because that's the species I know that is predominantly lives in bat houses in the southeast as opposed to other species. So I did find them on Pine Island. Yep. So I'm going to kind of start wrapping it up here just to talk about some of the conservation work we do, because it's in our title, Lubee Bat Conservancy. So we do a lot whenever it comes to conservation. We've worked in 19 countries over the past 32 years. I was just going to share with you guys a couple of our projects that had a lot of success. So over in the Solomon Islands, which is Australia, is the Solomons, there are 5 species of bats found nowhere else in the world called monkey-faced bats. Years ago, we put together a fundraising and awareness campaign, and that led to, for the first time in 3 years, we got good visual and good natural history data on the New Georgia monkey-faced bat. And the first time in 25 years, we've got good information on the Guadalcanal monkey-faced bat. And I had mentioned before that you're not going to have any successful conservation work unless you work with a local community. So most of this research was in the hands of our friends from the University of Queensland, working with these fine folks from the Solomon Islands Community Conservation Partnership. And in the whole country, the Solomon Islands, they had never had formally protected areas. There were no protected forests in that country. So thanks to a lot of the work that Lubee had funded with some of our partners, and again with the folks from the Community Conservation Partnership and University of Queensland, that led to some of the forests being formally protected. And these forests have spiritual, cultural, economic significance to the people that are living there, and they want these forests around. Solomon Islands have been hit very, very hard, especially from about 800 meters sea level down. And a lot of deforestation goes there, a lot of converting to palm oil. So to be able to protect some of these forests is pretty big. There's another one that we just funded a couple years ago. So right here in this star, it's the largest atoll in the world. It's the Ontong Java Atoll. And they were just looking for research to be able to go out there. You can't fly out there. You had to take a boat. And there's a small population of people living out there, but they're getting affected by sea level rise, climate change. So they knew that there was a species of bat out there. They had heard that there was a species of bat out there, but they didn't know if they were still alive. So back in 2018, we were able to send out a crew, and they did find these bats. They also found some new species of reptile and insects, and the people up there seem to be doing okay. They're looking for some alternatives. They're not hunting the bats. The bats seem to have their own little area. And I was just on a call maybe within the past couple of months, that they're finally have the genetics over at the United States to see if this is a separate species or just a subspecies. But we're now working on with plans with our partners in Australia and the folks that live here in the Solomon Islands to see if we can not only try to save the bats, but make some farming and some other options available for the human population that wants to stay there. This is one of my favorites. I love talking about this. We did work for years and years in Madagascar. I've mentioned about 90% of the old growth forest in Madagascar has been logged. Conservation education was urgently needed. So we were able to get a fund from Disney, and then Lubee put up some of our own money. And so what we did was we worked with the communities over there to protect some of these major bat roosts. Now, they do hunt the bats over there, and it has been unsustainable, which has caused an issue. But fire over there, bushfire, is also a problem. Is what they'll do is they'll clear cut a lot of these areas or burn it down to get charcoal, but it's not a sustainable practice. So we work with some of our partners over there to create these huge fire breaks around some of these protected areas. And what we did is working with an NGO over there, Madagascar Bakaji, and they said, you know, we want to do a little bit more for the communities there, so why don't we start something called a community seed fund? And what that seed fund is, it went out and it worked with some of the women's groups. So it empowered some of the women's groups that they were given X number of seeds. What they had to do is farm those seeds, give back what they were given, and anything else that they were able to collect, they were able to use. They could sell at the market, they could do whatever, they could start their own business with them. And what that led to is not only sustainable agricultural techniques, but it sent the men, because that's how these cultures are over there that we're working with through our partners, the men would go out there and patrol the areas to create fire breaks around these bat roosts, to plant these seed plots on the outside of that, to not only protect the bat species, but to grow their gardens, but to protect for the bushfires that were there. And ultimately, what that led to was some schools being built over there, education campaigns, working with teachers, working with our partners. And we're happy to say that even though they were still hunting bats in these areas because it's just part of their culture, populations around these three major roosts increased by 40%. So it's really cool to see how these projects, taking this holistic approach, works. Work with the local communities, work with the teachers that are over there, work with NGO partners. We're able to increase bat populations, teach about bats. They saved these areas from bushfire, created jobs for the women and jobs for the men. Pretty cool that that was able to work. And just really within the past 13 months, we've gotten 3 grants to continue some of our work. Over in Rodriguez Island, we have this species. There's quite a few in North American zoos. They're kind of like this big, look like a cross between a teddy bear and an Ewok, but we've been working over there for years and years. This is a very good community-led project. These bats were one of the most endangered mammals in the world in the 70s, only about 75 left. Today, thanks to a lot of the conservation efforts from the locals in the island, there's now about 20,000 bats and just a fantastic overall community education project on the island. This is more work that we're doing over in the Solomon Islands, although Bougainville Island is geographically part of the Solomons. From a government perspective, it's part of Papua New Guinea, but this is going to empower the people that are over there for food security, job creation, learning about some of the animals that are in these areas, not really studied at all. Again, another holistic approach. And then this one right here is going to be working with local in-country partners in New Caledonia and Fiji to learn about some of these bats, but there's just really no natural history information, but in doing so, this helps to create jobs. Last thing I'll talk about is just Lubee's education program, because we do a lot. Although 2020 was a little difficult, I'm sure you guys can understand why, but on a normal year, we have tours and outreach programs for all ages. We usually hit about 30,000 people a year. Schools, scouts, religious groups, everybody's invited. We partner with a lot of the organizations I had mentioned before, and we have an annual bat festival, usually in October, scheduled for October 23rd this year. Hopefully we'll be able to have it. We'll see. But we have a huge bat festival once a year. So, last one is how to help bats. If there's any folks out there that like to explore caves and mines, spelunkers, avoid disturbing bat roosts. If you are going into caves, follow all the rules whenever it comes to decontamination, going in and out, honoring these cave closures. You can also plant a bat-friendly garden. There's certain species that I have listed which will bloom at night, and that's going to bring in some insects, and that'll also help to bring in bats. You can put up a bat house, which Lubee's page has a lot of information, lubee.org, bat house info there. Learn about local species. I'm sure Crow has some fantastic information on the bats that are in the area, the bats that are brought in. You can always volunteer. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out with us at info@lubee.org. And on that, I'm done. So I appreciate you guys having me. Does anyone have any questions about Lubee bats or the myriad of other things which I decided to talk with you guys about today?
Ryan, we do have some questions, and my apologies if you answered any of these in your program. But Kristen wants to know, she's from Rhode Island. What kinds of bats are up north?
So little brown bat would have been one of the most populous, depending on how the species had been hit by white nose syndrome. They might not be as common as they were, but I'm guessing, I don't know the species, but little brown bats, big brown bats, northern long-eared bats, silver-haired, eastern. I think that's all I got for now. But yes, there are definitely bats in Rhode Island. And I can guarantee you little browns, red browns, little browns, big browns, and red bats are probably some of the most common. And again, I believe northern long-eared and silver-haired, I think.
Thank you.
Dawn says she lives in Pittsburgh, a suburb of Dormont.
Dormont,
and she see small bats at dusk. You know what kind those might be?
What was this individual's name who asked?
Dawn.
Hi, Dawn. I am also from Pittsburgh. I grew up in the Elizabeth area. My wife is from Sewickley. So yes, actually, we were visiting Tracy's folks just a few years ago, and I got this little detector. Anybody can get it. It's on Wildlife Acoustics. Wildlife Acoustics is a company. You can plug it into your iPhone, and the app is free. The device, I believe, is like $300 to $400, but it makes echolocation audible, and it also ID the species. The ID is about 50 to 60% accurate. This is really cool. But in Pittsburgh, so we were in the Sewickley area, I got big brown bats, silver-haired bats, and eastern red bats. So yeah, Pennsylvania has got quite a few species, and little brown bats are in that area as well. So the species that I had mentioned that were in Rhode Island are pretty much going to be the same species you find up in Pittsburgh.
And you had asked, we actually, currently in our Visitor Education Center, do have a display on bats. So we'll have to take a picture of it and send it to you and see if it's adequate. But Tara wants to know if you ever offer virtual tours of your facility.
Yes, we are offering virtual tours, and if you go to info@lubee.org, you can find more information there. There's also information on our website, lubee.org. And we're going to start up again. We were doing Lubee live chats on Facebook, which was really cool. So it was usually, I believe, on Wednesdays we'd go in there and kind of mingle, kind of get somewhat close to some of the animals and talk to you a little bit about them and put up enrichment. Because our bats, like if you look at this slide, if we're still sharing it, I mean, all these bats were at Lubee. There's some pretty good shots of a mom and a pup and a mom and a pup over here. These guys are they use their enrichment a lot. Our bats will even paint if they decide to interact with this device we have. They can't get to the paint, but they paint. So there's really a lot of cool things you can see. And I will say, too, if you go on our website, lubee.org, there's a link on that homepage to our Explore cameras. So explore.org has cameras on wildlife all over the world. But when it comes to bats, there's only two, and they're both at Lubee. And we have it in 2 of our enclosures, and in one of them is our breeding pen. So the male's already been pulled, but we have at least 3 bats in there that are pregnant. And 2 years ago, people got to watch the bats give birth live, which was great because some people still think they lay eggs. So I thought it'd be kind of a cool opportunity for people to see that bats give live birth. They raise their young, they nurse their young. Here's again, you can see here's a mom and her pups right here. So that's pretty cool to see. Again, if you go to our website, lubee.org, it's on the homepage, or if you go to explore.org, just search for bats, you'll be able to see it.
Looks like we have a question from Morgan from Toronto, Canada. White nose has decimated out the bats in Canada. Is there any good news regarding white nose?
Yes, so there are fantastic people out there doing great work. One of which is a woman that we worked with for years and years. Her name is Dr. Deanne Reeder. I highly suggest you Google her name, Deanne Reeder, R-E-E-D-E-R. She actually found the bat species and got the name on in Africa, which is pretty cool. But for years and years, she's on our scientific advisory board, and we did a lot of immunological work with her. But she has spent, she's Bucknell University, which is in South Central Pennsylvania. She has done a lot of work with white nose syndrome, and they are finding bats in 3 of the hardest hit states of Pennsylvania, Vermont, and New York. They're finding them in these caves, and it's not like these populations have just, they just first came into these caves and they're seeing. These populations have been in these caves where white nose syndrome has been for a couple years now, and what they're finding is that they're bigger, they're more muscular, they've got more fat on them, and they're adapting to the fungus. So there's great work being done when it comes to cave closures and educating people. I think quite a few folks here knew what white nose syndrome is. Populations are rebounding. I don't know if we're ever going to see it in our lifetime, but they are rebounding in certain areas. And again, they didn't just come into these caves and they're fine for the first time. They're in these caves surviving after a couple years, which is really good. So great folks out there, and I encourage you to look up Dr. Deanne Reeder and some of the work she's done.
Well, Brian, I think you get the prize for attracting the most international audience. We have Canadians here. We have Julie Ann from London in the UK.
Cool.
So I'll let Rachel finalize the thank yous, but thank you from me and everyone else. So
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
So yes, thank you, Brian, for piping in with us today, and again, everybody that has joined in. Just a quick reminder, next Tuesday on March 2nd, we have another speaker series, and it is how to make your yard look beautiful and wildlife friendly. Our friend Jenny Evans over at Sanibel Captiva Conservation, her talk is going to be on reframing our perspective gardening in Southwest Florida. So if you'd like to join that, feel free to head on to our website. And yes, so thank you again for all joining, and we appreciate you.
See ya.
Thank you, everyone. This program has been recorded. And so if you'd like to watch it again, because you may have missed some great tidbit that Brian gave, just reach out and we can send you the link. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks.
See you next week.